Brilliant. If you can introduce yourself when you ask a question, that'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Hello. Okay. Is that working?
Yep.
Yeah. Hello. My name's Barry Bassnett. I work for a company called Knowledgement, and we work in the knowledge management side of BIM's a subcomponent. I'm really interested in an awful lot of the discussions are about designing from BIM and Revit and stuff like that, but I'd like to ask the clients' opinions about how do we move. Most of the buildings we're working with are what we call brownfield BIM. Obviously, with a lot of your clients, it's how do you start? Was there a minimum requirement that you need from a digital twin in order for you to actually use these sort of systems?
Yeah, absolutely.
I take it this is on. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Excellent. That is the biggest challenge, because in most cases it's existing stock that we're trying to impose a digital way of working on. And like any problem the size of an elephant, you decide to start eating somewhere and start small. So in most cases for the core buildings we look after, there will be a handful of critical assets. So we start with those critical assets. So that might be air conditioning, heating, cooling, and some representation of main electrical incoming. So with a platform like in Vicara, and that's the strength, I think, when we'd had time before with Anand, that allows for semi-structured data to be able to rest in it to get you going. And let's call it that first phase. Then over a period of time, you can enhance it. So you can then start to add to it. Now, will it be complete compared to a new build? No. But it needs to be enough that you operate from that you can achieve some of the aims you want. Now, by starting that way, it means we move the journey forwards. And then as you go back and do a large-scale fit-out and you do an update, you continually feed the beast then with that updated information. So it'll take a period of time. But as more and more adopt this way of working, and they are, I was at JLL previously, so they've also on a similar journey. Likewise, Cushman & Wakefield, so 3 biggest in the world, are engaging with this. You start with baby steps, and it will soon start to accelerate, becomes a common way of working. Pre-pandemic, it wasn't that popular. Post-pandemic, it is, for a number of reasons. To be able to measure how we're using space because of the flexible way of working, and now because of geopolitical tensions, we're seeing real threat to energy and security. So as a result, almost every client is now asking for a solution like this to be commenced on that contract. So yeah, it starts baby steps, but it will soon ramp up. And for those that work in the sector, it means it's probably going to be quite an exciting and busy time. So over the next 25 months, you will see a large step forwards. Will that mean we can achieve a vision for 2050? I'm going to be a betting man and say yes, because it will be a commonplace in the way we operate. The bigger driver will be the lack of people to be able to do the work the way we're doing it. And therefore, it will change behaviours to start operating in this way. It's already happening, and the rate of acceleration. Will it be perfect? No. Will it be good enough to achieve change? Yes.
Bola, would you answer that one? I'd love to hear your opinion from a kind of social housing perspective and the brownfield site.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Your name, sir? Barry.
Barry.
Do you know, I think we've got a different problem, or challenge rather. It's people. You know, what was the baseline, basic requirement was in your question, right? I think the basic requirement starts from people and culture, because you can kick off on this journey about twins and assets, but if you don't have the right cultural appreciation about why you're doing it, right? And this is the big driver in social housing at the moment. It's not the fact that the golden thread is now a legal requirement. It's why did it have to become a legal requirement is the real issue. And I find that people, all levels of seniority, just haven't really landed in the why. Why do we have to do it? Why do we have to get it right? And what is the long-term play for us using data, right? If we can get that right first, before we embark on commissioning projects and services, then I think we'll have more sustainability. But if we don't, if we do this as a knee-jerk reaction to something to avoid going to jail, which is where a lot of people are, I don't think it'll be sustainable. So I think it's people. Our biggest challenge is people.
Great.
So I think going back to the question around how do you start, so what we find is on a lot of our brownfield sites, we tend to have to collect the data, and then as we collect that brownfield site, then slowly digitizes over time. So we'll go in, we'll do a project, and that piece will then go into the twin. 5 years later, maybe we'll come back. The new piece of work that we're building or designing will then go into the twin, and it's just going to be a process of slowly but surely updating what our clients have. It's not going to be an overnight hit a switch. Everything's going to be all singing or dancing.
Thank you. It's quick. Thank you. Self-service.
Thanks. Andrew Waring, Virtualify Information Management. It's potentially a quite technical question just in terms of the longevity of these digital twins and how long they need to be maintained for and kept up to date. We're not talking about, trigger events and just making those things up to date. We're talking about, Python's only been around for 30 years. HTML5 is only 15 years old. Language changes in taxonomy with Uniclass is updated every 3 months. How do we ensure that anything that comes in 20, 30, 50, 100 years from now can actually be mapped back from when the data was originally created and throughout the process? And is there going to be an exponentially bigger overhead as time goes on and these data sets get bigger and bigger?
I think that's an awesome question. Your name, sir?
Andrew.
Andrew. Data sets and evolution over time, right? I don't know how you build that into a twin, but it comes back to skills. And the coder, who's training the coder? Does the coder have a long enough span of relevance in his code or her code to accommodate future change? And what does the change look like? So if we think about conflating building asset performance with energy requirements, with funding deliverables, will the code have the right components to interpret, read, and then simulate what the twin requires? That's a skills thing. That's a people thing, right? You can slice and dice this conversation in so many ways. It will come back to people and skills. And that's why I think we've got to focus on the culture. And without the cultural piece, none of what you've just said, which is going to happen, will be sustained. And I think that's the challenge we have. The challenge isn't really the tech, it's the people, right? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Does that help?
Not technically, but yeah,
You're not
culturally.
getting a technical answer from me.
I'll have a go at technical. Because it's a really good question. It's not just going to be about what we do with BIM. It's going to be what we do with the vast construct of data that we have at the moment. So a core component, about 40% of my job is with the data center business. It's the fastest growing asset class in the world. It's probably the most exciting for CBRE. We're slightly underperforming on it at the moment. And we were lucky enough to be part of the IBM quantum computer build out in Germany. And it was interesting meeting some of those guys that they see this as a baby step towards how we move to quantum computing, which will not be semiconductor-based. They see it as a move to an organic structure over the next 20 or 30 years. And one of the questions they're trying to answer is, how do we go to this hyper-density? BIM will just be a part of it, but what about all our shopping hazards? What about everything we've learned about the environment? There's only so many data centers you can build. There's only so much energy we can convert and hold into silicon. So that seems to be the route. The coding is very relevant because bit by bit we'll have to adjust to a new format in the way we store and process. But it would appear the industry is expecting over the next 20 to 30 years to move to an organic quantum solution. What that looks like, I don't know, because I work in the built environment. I don't work as a brain surgeon. But it is one to watch, and it will be a new discipline. In the meantime, how do we maintain it? Well, we're seeing vast growth in the built environment of groups of data scientists that ultimately become core part of your company. We've invested quite heavily. I was at JLL previously. We set up a whole division and spent a lot of money moving into having long-term career for data scientists, and it was really successful there. CBRE is a different approach, but that discipline allows us to be able to keep track and move along with whatever comes next. Well, we'll see where we are in 20 years' time, where quantum computing is, and also where biological computing is.
Yeah, and also, like, the digital twin should not be a product. You should not be buying an off-the-shelf product. It should be a platform that you can compose and build and do the coding that needs to be done as and when required, so that you can keep pace with these changes. So if you go out and you buy a fixed product, you're going to have to wait for that company to do all those changes for you and send you the updates. Whereas if you've got more control over your twin experience, if you like, or your twin applications, then that's the key forward as well. And that's why We have a platform.
I suppose my main concern with that generally is if you start with, say, one building and then suddenly Uniclass changes and no one actually calls a door anymore. You have to update one building. 10 years from now, you have 100. 20 years from now, you have 1,000. And you have to go back every time and update that. So it's going to rely quite heavily on machine learning and other core concepts to kind of push that back through.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of platforms that are going to need to start to account for accessing centralized kind of taxonomies of data and pushing it back.
And so if you build the correct ontology and you have a knowledge graph, then it should be easier to do that. If you have a standardized ontology for all of your buildings, the upgrade should be just straight through.
I think that comes down to Bola's point before about ensuring as a general sector, we adopt standardization and a set of disciplines that are common. And by actually having everything as a service as opposed to a bespoke product, that will support that.
Yeah.
So in most cases, let's use class definition. Actually, what you do generically in the standard is centrally we all use one set of class standardization. You just globally change that standardization and it would feed into everyone's platform. Now, are we there yet? No, because in some cases BIM has been slow. Twins may go a bit faster, but that will become a component which is exactly the standardization that Bola's pushing for, and we will see that globally. It'll be an uneven path, but keep that at the front of mind as you move forward to that long-term view to ensure people understand strategically that needs to be catered for.
Thanks.
Yeah, we have another question. Thank you.
James, it's more for yourself there. My colleague and I are working with HSE, Capital Estates, and we're on a big digital transformation project. So I suppose listening to you there earlier on about predictive maintenance. In theory, it's the future. It is the way to go. But I think in the public sector, especially in Ireland, we're long ways from that. So if we take the HSE's national estate, where you've about 4,000 buildings, and some of those are some of the biggest hospitals in the country, to get the data set of existing assets uploaded onto a digital platform, and then to interlink that through interoperability, say, with a Tririga system that we're working on to look ahead at predictive maintenance. I suppose in your experience, that task is a huge undertaking. And I suppose where would you define the first steps in that?
I'll go from a CBRE point of view because we have some of those issues, and part of that is the selection of tooling that can work with semi-structured and unstructured data. And that way you can take it from a number of sources. We're working with a fantastic company, I'll give them a little shout, called Bell, and we do this for data centers at the moment in the way we're looking at mass migrations. So when you look at most enterprise data centers at the moment with really complex networks, lots of servers and lots of software, are moving into a hybrid model where they want to exercise cloud with colo. And that's given us a baseline model, because that's a lot of data, a lot of complex data, and a lot of it is unstructured, oddly. And we've seen some fantastic imagination by using coding and a framework with some really clever people that can sit on common tooling that are able to ingest that data through ETL format. There's a great product called Matillion that allows you then to set it into an EDP. That's exactly what you're talking about. We've then replicated to model how we will do it to overcome the brownfield problem, to understand how much of a big problem it is. It's not quite as big as we think. It does take discipline, and it does take a certain amount of investment, but it's doable. And 4,000 buildings, the nicest possible way, I'll be guarded how I say it, we'll eat that for breakfast. Not this year, but hit us up next year and we'll be able to put forward. And we're not the only ones. Our competition are doing exactly the same thing. And they've been quite innovative in the way we look across a number of disciplines and different practices that enable us to capture data, to structure it into the right ontology to ensure that it's manageable moving forwards, but how we overcome the need for people roaming around with clipboards for 2 years, because I guarantee you, as soon as you move away from that asset with a clipboard, some bugger's changed it, and it becomes irrelevant. And that's why the kind of manner in which the way we work together with platforms like Invocara, we are able to move that forwards for problems like 4,000. You've done it, though, for real in water structure, which is a real headache as well.
Yeah, so with water, obviously, each water company kind of has their own asset hierarchy, their own systems. So what we've had to do there is we take their asset hierarchy and systems, and then we try and translate that into a standard classification, albeit for most water companies we use Uniclass. And then from there, at least once we've translated that classification, we can then have a really good feel for what they've got across their portfolio of treatment works. But in terms of actually then mapping that to 3D elements for a 3D model twin, you don't necessarily need to do that. As long as you've got that structure and that same classification across all those elements, you're kind of away. And then as you start to build and collect data as you work in those brownfield sites, as I touched on earlier, you can start to build the 3D elements and then start to link those elements to it, if that makes sense.
Are we good? Okay, I have a question. Time is kind of up, but a question for each of you, and it's the same question, so one at a time. If you had one wish to change this industry...
For those who remember it, is it? No screen, though. Same question to contestant number 2.
So contestant number 1. If you had one wish to change the industry, what would that be?
Education.
Fab.
I would expect every trade to have a new baseline qualification based around data and digitization. Because without it, as a nation, we're going to find ourselves behind. But that's the only way we can move forward. That's coming to Bola's point. Again, I can access 1,000 different calculators, but if people are not taught to operate them and believe in operating them, the sector, my business, doesn't move forward. So it would be that, to introduce a standardization of that education for every single trade.
Brilliant. James?
I'm going to tend to agree, really. Education's the big part. So again, I think there's opportunities for when our younger graduates go to get chartered. There's not necessarily any boxes they need to tick from a digital perspective. So I figure we could start to integrate that into our chartership process, ensures that our engineers of the future are more digital savvy, and again, across all trades. Just make sure that there is a digital element as they work through their professional qualifications.
Brilliant. Bola?
Awesome. Thanks for that, guys. And for you also, Claire. Yeah, I'm going to build on the education piece. And it's the reason why we're developing a Digital Twin Skills Academy, which is agnostic to sector and person. So whether you're C-suite CEO, school children, you have a role to play in learning about the skills required. And what we need to do, we need to understand, actually, the industry doesn't know it needs this. You may have an understanding that it's required, but the industry doesn't know it needs people that have certain skills that we're currently not using today. So education, education, education.
And if you're interested in mine, it's cooperation. If we could get people to cooperate more and not be like, this is mine, and share, that'd be really good. And open up and be open source and so that's mine. Thank you very much. And please give a big round of applause to our fantastic panelists. Are we good?